Okay. All right. Welcome to this training, How to Beat the Menopause Bloat. I've been hearing this come up a lot, so I'm really excited to have a special guest here today to kind of talk about this. I always love knowing who the imperfect action takers are in this community. So drop into the comments. Let me know if you're here live or if you're catching the replay. This sends a little signal to tell me, hey, I'm an imperfect action taker here. And today I have a special guest, Dr. Christina de Kroon, a naturopathic doctor. And she's done actually a bunch of trainings with us inside this community. She's done one on digestion, a different training. And then we've done a series on menopause as well and weight loss. And Dr. Christina also works with a lot of my clients when we coach one-on-one, which is really great because I get to work on the nutrition, the exercise, the lifestyle pieces, and Dr. Christina gets to work on the lab values and everything else that shows up with that and from the holistic side of things. So it works really great together, and we've been able to catch some pretty awesome things to help our clients along. So if you wanted to actually check out that digestion one, you'll find it in the guide section there too. And then yeah, so let's just dive in. Are you good with that, Christina?
Of course, yeah.
All right.
So yeah,
Yeah. Well, I thought like let's first like try and understand what digestion, why does digestion and inflammation change during perimenopause or menopause? Why does that happen?
yeah, there's so many things going on in menopause, and sometimes it can be so overwhelming too to really feel like crap and then not understanding why things are going on. But menopause, it's that first full year of no period. That's officially the diagnosis of menopause, and perimenopause is all the ups and downs, kind of wonky cycles leading into menopause. So menopause, we're signaling the end of the reproductive life cycle of a woman's body, which is an exciting time. But there are going to be some changes in terms of the hormonal control with estrogen, progesterone, a few like electrolyte shifters and things like that. And it's going to show up in the digestion system, and also it can show up as inflammation too. So, in terms of digestion, what happens in menopause is that we go from our active form of estrogen into our stored form of estrogen. So, it's a little bit more inactive. So, we see a natural decline in estrogen levels, which is supposed to happen, but it can really shift the gut microbiome. And our gut is made up of billions and trillions of different bacteria. There's some fungus in there too. There's a bunch of things that really make up this ecosystem in our digestive system. And when it gets out of balance and we have a big hormonal shift, we can get what's called a dysbiosis, which is an overgrowth of some bacteria that'll cause symptoms like gas and bloating, constipation, or we could go the other way and have diarrhea and more loose stools. We also have a naturally decrease in the movement of food through the body. So we have a slow digestion with the onset of menopause. So this will often present as constipation as we have reduced gut motility, and then it just takes longer for food to move through the body and for nutrients to be absorbed and things like that. It gives an opportunity for more water to be reabsorbed in the body. And that can really make it harder to have a normal bowel movement that is pain-free, and also can lead to bloating and some water retention as well. Anytime we have stool kind of sitting in the intestines waiting to be exited from the body, sometimes it can present as abdominal cramps too. So I have a lot of women in my practice who will talk about kind of this vague pain that they don't understand, and it's kind of up like either under the liver or like under the right rib cage or like lower in the belly too. And sometimes it's just kind of hard to tease out, what's the pain of just general discomfort in the digestive system versus like something else going on too. So digestion makes up a big chunk of my discussion with patients for sure. Also with menopause comes increased gut permeability. So this is a situation you might have heard kind of the term leaky gut. So essentially like the cells in our gut aren't it's held tightly together, and just allowing for, toxins, undigested food particles to kind of pass through the gut lining into the bloodstream. And that will trigger in our body like an immune response, and then also some increased inflammation. And we feel inflammation in the body. Inflammation can present as bloating, water retention, joint pain, fatigue, headaches, all that kind of stuff too. And it's very common in menopause to have this, what I call like a systemic inflammation response. So it's a generalized overall increased inflammation in the body. And I measure that in the blood using a marker called CRP. It doesn't tell me where the inflammation is. It just kind of gives me like a low level, like general idea of what the inflammation level is in the body. There's different interleukins that too will be increased in menopause, like IL-6 and things like that. That's getting into like the very specific physiology of inflammation. But there are big shifts that happen in menopause, and we feel them in our body too. So mood changes too can really come along with inflammation in the body. In terms of like inflammation, we can also get inflammation specifically in the gut. And there's this term like fire in the gut, fire in the brain. So when things are really not sitting well in the gut, it can present as mood changes because of so much of our serotonin, our happy, feel good kind of neurotransmitter is made in our gut. So we really want to prioritize decreasing inflammation in the gut so that we can have a healthy kind of response in our mood as well. But that comes into play with the gut microbiome. It plays such a crucial role in the gut-brain axis, and changes during menopause can disrupt that communication, and you can get symptoms like brain fog, anxiety, depression. We also know that in terms of inflammation and menopause is that as estrogen declines, we can see an increase in oxidative stress. And oxidative stress it can just damage nearby tissues and contribute to chronic inflammation. So we think about that specifically in cases like osteoarthritis, right, where there's like a lot of chronic inflammation in the joint, and it starts to wear away at the functionality of the joint, and it can cause pain. In terms of like why we also have higher levels of inflammation in menopause is that we can see a shift in our immune system in menopause. So it can make you a little bit more susceptible to infections and chronic diseases. If you have a diagnosed autoimmune condition, we kind of look for other autoimmune conditions that can start to display symptoms in menopause as well. So there's really such a big host of things going on in menopause, and it's so much more than just a cessation of your period, right? There's this whole body response, and our digestion can definitely feel the changes too.
Yeah, and I love that we're talking about this because often women will say, like, I just want to lose my lower middle, right? I'm just getting like that donut or that spare tire. I've never had it, or it's getting bigger, and I'm doing all these crunches and I'm doing all these things. And oftentimes it's one where just we're not including that there's digestion and there's inflammation disruption that's happening because of changes in our hormonal cycle. And number
Yeah.
two is even though it feels like we're doing everything, for example, crunches and doing all this stuff, we're not actually focusing on the right thing. So I love that we're making this connection between, hey, things are happening, things are shifting. And we're going to get to that there's actually things that we can control. It's not all lost, right? It's not, don't accept the answer that, well, this is menopause, this is how it is, accept it. Don't accept that there are actual things that we can do because our hormones are influenced by our inputs. But number three is we're actually looking, okay, when we're thinking about weight loss, especially during this transition time, oftentimes we're not putting digestion into the equation, but yet we're feeling the changes in our body, but we're thinking it's not related because we're eating clean, we're eating healthy, and that sort of thing. So I love that we're started off by this by saying like, hey, yeah, things are shifting, and it's not just on the hormone side, it's the digestion and the inflammation side. And I love your connection to mood, and I love your connection to joint pain as well, because that's been coming up a lot, and most women aren't necessarily seeing the correlation between it all.
Yeah, and I know that you and we've talked at length about the role of cortisol too, but there's also like a direct link of cortisol, which is our stress hormone, and the impact it has on digestion too. And we know in menopause that there can be, as estrogen declines, it creates an opportunity for cortisol to increase just by nature of the enzymes and things like that. So the more stress we feel, the higher cortisol production we feel. We can also feel that in our digestive system. So if we're not managing like this whole body approach, we can miss symptoms, right? Or we can not see the full benefit of the work that you're putting in.
Yeah, and that one's an important, just an aside note too, is that stress doesn't have to be like a big T stress, like nothing significant's happened, or hey, I've healed all my childhood trauma, or whatever that looks like. But it can also be just like the day-to-day managing, right? And some of us aren't thinking about how much we're thinking about food, how much we're thinking about our body and how that's causing stress. Or it's like, hey, we're like going from doing nothing to doing all kinds of cardio, all kinds of workouts, and the stress, even though it's a good thing, it does cause stress on the body. And so stressors don't have to be big things. Stressors can be the low level thing. And here's the thing is when your hormones change, right? It's like maybe you used to be able to do a 9 out of 10 out of stress before, but now the hormones are changing. Your 9 out of 10 is now a 5 out of 10. And so your stress threshold changes, right? And so I think that that's really good one to kind of touch on. So let's touch on like, okay, so estrogen's going down, but then we got cortisol. And so talk about the connection with that and inflammation.
So the more cortisol production in the body can present as increased inflammation in the body as well. And that's going to cause symptoms like fatigue, insomnia, disrupted sleep patterns, because cortisol can really change our kind of natural melatonin feedback loop in to get our restful sleep. Mood changes is really common with increased cortisol levels and weight gain. Specifically, we talked about that kind of like midsection weight. Um, and then as cortisol increases, it can also have a kind of feedback loop on estrogen, and it will decrease the specific enzyme that converts to estrogen. Different androgens to estrogen essentially. So cortisol will also break down your estrogen receptors in the body. So it's going to decrease your overall sensitivity to estrogen in the body. And then it's going to have an impact on the gut health too. So we know there's a connection between like IBS and your gut health too. So if you're feeling really anxious or stressed, you're probably going to notice it in your bowels with like loose stools. And that's a
And
direct.
I would just like to pause there because all of us have been through a situation where it's like we had a big presentation the next day or a big meeting the next day, or an interview that we're really stressed about. And then all of a sudden it's like you get the diarrhea the day before. It's like all of a sudden all of that gets out of whack. Well, we can see it when it's related to that, but we're not necessarily seeing it through the lens of like hormonal changes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when we have like a cortisol mediated suppression of estrogen, so that's like super high or cortisol bringing down your estrogen even further, it's really going to make those typical menopausal symptoms like hot flashes, night sweats, vaginal dryness so much worse. So that's why addressing cortisol in relation to like gut health and inflammation is so important too. And it's often one of the missing pieces of menopausal treatment.
Yeah, and I guess like so we already talked about like hey, we can get like the stress bloat, right? And we can see an increase in bloat from the beginning of the day to the end of the day, although some women are maybe waking up with bloating in the morning. We can see acid reflux as well, or some clients have had GERD. We can see increase in headaches and migraines as well, sinus congestions, immunity suppression, so your sickness more often, brain fog, heartburn, like I said, brain fog. I'll say it again because I forgot and then fatigue. And you can move from constipation to diarrhea, or for some of my clients, it's like they're not going for 2 days or 3 days or even more, and then they're toggling between those two. And then joint pain. Did I kind of miss any? That feels like a lot.
Yeah, I think those are kind of the big ones for sure. Yeah, so many changes are happening and they can present as so many different symptoms. So it's hard to always understand, but there's such big hormonal shifts going on in the body.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to feel all doom and gloom. So I just want to caveat here is like, yeah, all those things are happening, but again, we can influence how those things are happening with our inputs, which we'll get to. So, like we just kind of talked about, like there's a lot of changes happening at the stage of life, and you feel them, but often we don't understand kind of what's going. Like the math just doesn't add up. We feel like we're, doing everything right. We haven't changed things, which a lot of women will say, but we feel worse, and the scale actually is moving in the opposite direction, and our clothes just aren't fitting the same way or the same way they used to, or the way we want them to. So, not that we understand, we kind of now understand why digestion changes and why inflammation goes up. And we hope with the like kind of the rest of today's training, you'll really understand why the math isn't adding up and how we need to kind of shift the game plan at this stage of life. And don't worry, we'll give you kind of what to actually focus on at this stage, particularly if you're experiencing shifts in digestion and inflammation. We're not going to leave you empty-handed, but it is to say that you do need a different game plan. And I want to pause there, let it land, because a lot of women do try and go back to what they did in their early 30s and early 20s, and the math doesn't math at this stage of the game. And so, like I said, in other trainings, weight loss, it really doesn't slow down as much as we think it does during menopause. We see a bigger decline in metabolism after the age of 60. We do see changes, like we've already expressed, that don't always feel so good. And it does feel like, hey, my metabolism is totally tanked at this stage. But the research actually just tells us otherwise. There is a little bit of a decline, but not as much as what we think. So I thought maybe let's go a little bit backward. A couple of weeks ago, I broke down digestion for you, and most of us think that we just eat and it comes out the other end, but that is just like not how it works. So let's go through like a brief kind of outline of how digestion works and why digestion needs to be counted in as part of like your weight loss, feel better approach.
Yeah, digestion it's a multi-step process for sure. And it starts like as soon as we bring any type of food, like whether it's a snack or a meal into our mouth. So like the act of grinding and chomping things down with your teeth will start the enzymatic kind of breakdown of your food. So in our mouths, we have a bunch of salivary glands. And really interestingly, you produce like up to 1 to 1.5 liters of saliva a day, which is why it's really important to maintain your hydration throughout the day so you can start with proper digestion as it starts right in the mouth. Saliva, it'll contain its higher content of an enzyme called amylase, which will help to break down carbs specifically in the mouth. And this is a really important step to start the digestion process. So if we like eat our food really quickly and we're not digesting it properly, we're not going to get that initial breakdown of carbs, and we're not going to get the most bang for our buck in terms of carb digestion, which is like our biggest influx of energy as we can get from carbs. Our quickest, I should say, not our biggest. So once we swallow, it goes through the esophagus in our throat, and it's moved downwards by a motion called peristalsis. And peristalsis is just the rhythmic contraction of food moving down. And we also have peristalsis in our lower gut as well. As it comes into the stomach, there's a bunch of different digestive juices that kind of get secreted. So pepsin, gastric, amylase. Amylase comes up again for the carb intake to help with the breakdown of protein and carbs. The stomach lining is protected, so it should be quite acidic in the stomach. So we have like a special mucus around the stomach lining, which will hopefully protect it from any ulcer kind of presentation with proper digestion. For sure. So in the stomach, that's where a lot of our protein denaturing starts to happen. So that's when we start to really break down protein is in the stomach. And from the stomach, it kind of goes into the small intestine. And it will, in the small intestine, that's kind of where the bulk of absorption happens in terms of our nutrients. So it largely goes from the large intestine, and then the food gets broken down and the particles start going into the bloodstream for energy production. With the small intestine, we also have a release of a different bile and more enzymes, digestive enzymes specifically from like our pancreas and gallbladder. And it's secreted right into the small intestine too to help that further breakdown. And then it moves through the rest of the small intestine and into the large intestine. In the large intestine, we have an opportunity for like water to be reabsorbed too, which is a beneficial thing. It kind of helps with our overall hydration and make sure that the stool is not too loose coming out, ideally, of the body. And then we eliminate it through the rectum or through urination, the waste products. Those are the two kind of ways that our body mostly eliminates even excess hormones and things like that. So that's why it's important for digestion to be running smoothly the whole process, because we need to eliminate things instead of giving them the opportunity to sit in the intestines, let's say, and be reabsorbed from there. Um, and yeah, I mean, I have a bunch of notes in terms of like the specific physiology and like where it goes from acidic to a more balanced kind of pH. But there are so many different factors that come into the digestion process, and there's a lot of enzymatic activity happening. So we need to support that natural ability of our body to digest, and we do that. We talk about a few tips kind of later on in this training, how to support those natural processes of digestion.
Yeah. So what I heard from you is that one, slow eating is really important to kickstart the digestive process in your mouth. And some of us are overlooking that or dismissing that as an important thing. And so really we kind of want that to happen there. And then two, we do want a level of acid in our stomach in order to help break down our food. And sometimes we used to have it and now we don't have it. And when we're not eliminating, we get a buildup of toxins in our body, which can include excess of hormones as well, right? That are just not clearing out. And that is contributing to you feeling like your hormones are not balanced and contributing to the increased inflammation. Did I kind of have that right?
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we can, I guess we can like really just start to see how digestion is connected to so much more, right? Like our immunity, feeling good hormones, energy, absorbing the nutrients from your food as well. So you're eating clean, you're eating healthy, but are you even taking in all the nutrients that you're taking in from food? And we can also see its connection to stress. So we really want good gut health because obviously we want to reduce the toxins, right? We want to clear out excess hormones or hormonal imbalances. And I hate to tell you, but fat loss and weight loss are not a priority when the toxins are not being cleared out or there's hormonal imbalances aren't returned to their balanced place. So you're saying, hey, I want to lose weight, but your body's like, tough shit. You need to start over here because we need to get rid of the toxins and balance out the hormones. And here's what's happening when we don't have good health. Like obviously, we have an increase in inflammation, right? And that can include joint pain as well. For women as well, when I see like, okay, they have like visible muscles and then they start to have more inflammation or retain more fluid, you start to feel like puffier and your muscles become less visible as well. You have decreased thyroid function. So this is your body's thermostat that determines how many calories you burn basically. Well, it could be at workout or just at rest as well. You can see a spike in insulin without having diabetes. I wanted to caveat that because it can mean like, hey, you're just having more energy crashes, like you're not feeling well after eating certain meals, even though they used to make you feel well, or you're feeling excessively full, even though you didn't eat a lot, or energy crashes where you're like, you have energy and then you're down. And then you see an increase in cortisol. And then as a result of all that, you have less fat burning and weight loss. So you're doing everything on the weight loss and fat burning side, but we're missing all of these other things that are a priority for the body. Did I miss anything there?
No, I think that's important too. I know in our past trainings too, we talked about like how there's an increased kind of susceptibility to insulin resistance, which is that kind of precursor to diabetes, where our body is just kind of being overloaded with this insulin messenger with blood sugar. So that's supposed to happen too. We are supposed to get a spike. It's more like how long after their food consumed. So that's where you're kind of feeling like the energy crashes will come into too. But yeah, those are definitely big sources of importance in terms of naturopathic medicine and why we've put such a strong focus on digestive health. You probably heard about, probiotics and all that stuff coming from a naturopathic perspective, but it is so, so important.
Yeah, and that's why when I coach women, it's always a 10-day gut protocol and it's always working with you as well in the beginning because what's the point of doing what we're going to do if we don't get the gut on board, knowing that at this stage of life, we have all of these things going on. So a lot of women kind of complain about an increase of bloating at this stage. They feel like they haven't changed anything, but bloating is happening all over the place. And there are two types of women that I often come across is the person who realizes they're bloated, they can feel it. And the other person who doesn't necessarily feel it, they just have a tightness going on. And I can see it when they submit their photos, but they're not actually feeling it. So let's talk about the types of bloating that could be happening and why they're happening.
Yeah, bloating, there's like a number of different reasons. And I always ask the question like, when do you notice you're bloating? Like, are you waking up with it? Is it right after you eat, or is it more at the end of the day? And all of those kind of just tell me different processes of what's going on in the body. So you can have bloating because your stool is so backed up, so you're like chronically constipated. So if you're like really stressed, you're not eating enough food, you're not getting enough carbs, your overall fiber intake is low throughout the day, sorry. And if you're not drinking enough water, that's a big one for constipation. And also just general movement for the body to help increase that natural peristalsis that's happening in the gut. If we're more sedentary and we're not as active, we can have an impact on overall gut motility and mobility as well. You can also have bloating because of this dysbiotic gut microbiome. So that dysbiotic, again, just meaning an imbalance of good bacteria versus bad bacteria. And it can present for many different reasons. Our gut health is influenced by what we're eating for sure, how we're sleeping, also by different medications that we're taking. So if you're on like an IUD, or hormonal birth control, antibiotics is a kind of big one that kind of wipes out all microbiome, right? And then it's up to us to kind of reseed from there. All of those can present as this dysbiotic gut microbiome. If you're chronically stressed, if you're not sleeping, if you've had like a big sickness too, it can temporarily shift that gut microbiome and we can get transient symptoms of bloat. Or they can be also more chronic in nature too. So that's when we think about SIBO or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth and things like that. Chronic constipation kind of goes back to that like backup of stool too. Chronic constipation, typically what happens, and this isn't like a hard fast rule, but after 3 days of not having a bowel movement, typically we get like such a buildup of toxin that your body needs to really eliminate everything and needs to clear out. So that's when we'll have like you're super constipated, you're in a lot of pain, and then all of a sudden you just have like this big bout of diarrhea. That doesn't mean that you're like completely emptying out. It's likely that there's still chronic constipation in the crypts of the lumen of the digestive system. So stool is still kind of like impacted. Um, and that's why we can see like that change from solid stools to more diarrhea. Chronic constipation can happen for so many different reasons. Typically in my practice, I see it as a result of a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. But there can also be some functional reasons why, like some changes in the anatomy of the gut that just increases the susceptibility or risk of chronic constipation as well. Stress bloat. This is one that, this is typically where I would see like people don't know that they're bloated, but they just like don't feel well. Typically I see it as a stress bloat. So if you're like running on the go and you're always eating super quickly, and then you're just jumping on the treadmill or something like that, and you're not really giving your body that rest and digest kind of phase that we need of our nervous system. It can present as just generalized bloating throughout the abdominal area or the stomach area. Sleep is such an important one for regulating our digestion too. So if you're not sleeping, or if you're having disruptive sleep, or if you're like going to bed at 1 in the morning and then you're up at 6 in the morning, we can see you even waking up with bloat, which is typically not the case. Ideally, there'd be, a flat stomach, like an empty stomach, first thing in the morning. But stress both comes exactly with what it sounds, right? When you're stressed, your body's going to start to display symptoms, and sometimes we just are so good at ignoring them or accepting them as our normal that we don't always acknowledge them. If you bloat, I always say like within the first like half hour after you have a big meal, that's typically a bloating caused by poor digestion or low digestive enzymes, or something's going on with your bile production, things like that. We can get that too if you're eating really fast, or if you're drinking too much water with your meals, and bringing in like a lot of air as you eat, so you're not taking time to just kind of rest and digest. And Cindy kind of mentioned too that feeling of water retention where you're just puffy, and you can see it in your face too. And I'm sure Cindy, through your progress pictures with your clients, you'll likely see like a change in like their just how their face looks, right? That's a lot of water retention just kind of be eliminating when you work so hard on your diet too, and you put in the effort. But water retention in menopause, it can be a common complaint because of that hormonal shift, that estrogen declining. We also have something going on with our kidney and aldosterone renin production. So we can see an increase in sodium retention. So our body's kind of holding on to sodium. And then to dilute that, your body wants to add more water to it too. So that's why we get this, your body's just kind of holding on to the water. There can be a slight change in blood pressure as well, which is why, as women going through menopause, putting a good focus on our cardiovascular health is super important too. So if you start to feel like really bloated, just kind of monitor your heart health and blood pressure too. Those are all important, but yeah, so many different reasons why bloating, again, not just like, oh, I'm bloated. I wonder why. There's so many different factors that come into it. And then depending on, why you might feel bloated or when throughout the day you feel bloated, it kind of changes treatment protocol in terms of supplement or dietary lifestyle recommendations as well.
Yeah, and I like this too because it's like there's like because a lot of women will just be like, "Hey, my weight is shifting. I'm getting the donut or the spare tire." And yeah, sure, it can be a shift in your body shape does change, right? And we can see because of like cortisol likes to put itself there. We can see shifts in estrogen and all that stuff, stress and all that stuff. But also, we're not considering or not separating out digestion, even pelvic floor. We're not separating out all of those components. We're just lumping it all together in fat, right? And so then we do a bunch of things that we think, okay, well, in my 30s, I used to do keto, I used to do intermittent fasting, I used to do all these things. I'm going to go do all those things because that's what helped me lose weight. But we're dismissing that this other part has shifted or changed, even though you haven't changed and even though those things used to work. So I love that we're having this discussion because I'm hoping light bulb moments are going off for women as they're listening to this and they're like, you're right. Every time I've been on a diet, I've never looked at that. Or you're right, I am doing everything, but I'm not looking at this. And again, we're going to get to that hopeful piece in a minute and give you the strategy. So yeah, so I guess now we understand from like a hormonal perspective why digestion changes and inflammation increases. We went through a brief overview of how digestion works. We covered why good gut health is important and the snowball that happens when we don't have good gut health. And we covered different kinds of bloating and why that happens too. So now let's move into some simple practical steps to help your digestive system out and to help you reduce the inflammation. Now, we're going to give you like a long list. And what I would hate is for a woman listening to this and feeling overwhelmed, like, and being like, too much, turn me off, right? I would rather you listen to this list and grab 1 to 2 that you feel are the easiest. So I call them the low-hanging fruit that you could start making changes. And then once you do, you're consistent with that. Maybe that takes 30 days, maybe that takes 60, maybe that takes 90. Then you come back and grab something else from this training and you keep adding to your toolbox. And then that accumulates over time in terms of changing, what you feel is hormonal imbalance and, the inflammation in your body. Does that sound fair, Christina?
Yeah, I think like those small, meaningful steps will lead to such a better outcome instead of just doing everything all at once and becoming overwhelmed and then giving up. So I love the scaffolding effect for sure.
Yeah. So why don't you start us off with the first one then? What can we do?
Yeah, this is one too. I don't always put as big as emphasis on drinking away from mealtime, but it is important too to kind of help with that overall pH balance in your stomach and making sure that it is at the appropriate pH and nice and acidic for you to be able to absorb or start to break down your food so you can absorb those nutrients. Um, if you are like chugging water as you're drinking your meal too, it's gonna increase transit time, so it's gonna speed things up, being digested through the stomach and the intestine. So you're not going to have the opportunity to absorb like the max nutrients essentially from your food, and then you're gonna get a quick release of glucose or blood sugar, and then you might not have enough to sustain it. So you'll feel that energy or that blood sugar drop, and you'll feel like that overall like feeling of fatigue that you really need to like slow down, have a nap. You might get cravings, and you're more likely to overeat later. So drinking away from meals and just kind of focusing on your solid food when you're eating is helpful. And this can be specifically helpful for bloating, this overall systemic kind of inflammation. If you have food sensitivities and you're consuming something that you know you're sensitive to, just allowing your body the time and opportunity to deal with it appropriately is so, so important.
Yeah, I'm going to add walking more, especially after meals. And I'm not talking about a brisk calorie focused walk. I'm not talking about putting on your weighted vest and doing a rucking walk. I'm just talking about just a gentle walk. I would take my dog, and it's just going to help you again with that digestive process and help you with your blood sugar control as well. And I always want to caveat with blood sugar, we're not specifically talking with people with a diagnosed insulin resistance or diagnosed diabetes. It's just the way you can feel or the changes in insulin markers or blood sugar and during this phase. So get out, walk after a meal.
Yeah, so powerful. We talked a little bit too about, really slowing down and engaging in this more mindful eating. So when you sit down to have a meal, just make sure that you're prepared to eat and, have your TV turned off, have your phone elsewhere, and you're just kind of focusing on food. And if you can share a meal with someone, engage in some beneficial communication, things like that, to really shift your nervous system into this parasympathetic tones to allow your body to rest and digest and get out of that fight or flight or that like super stress tense mode. So really slow down your eating, take time to chew your food. The faster we eat, the more likely we are to bring air in with our food, which can cause a lot of abdominal pain as the air moves through the body too. So just nice and slow, be very focused and very mindful of what you're eating and allowing your body to shift into that whole different side of your nervous system to have a nice, peaceful meal.
I really like that you said this because I talk a lot about slow eating and mindful eating, and I like that it's coming from your perspective as well. That hey, this is valuable and so often an oversight for people. The other thing that I often touch on is sleep and digestion. Can you just talk about that one a bit?
Yeah, sleep is so important, and we kind of talked about our melatonin perspective and how it can shift and how that can further change our insulin glucose control throughout the day. But ideally we would be having like a non-disruptive sleep, and we would go to bed and we get at least 8 hours of sleep. But sometimes that's not always happening. I know for myself, I have two little kids. I'm pregnant and expecting my third. Like my sleep is not the best. And for women in menopause too, like the anxiety can kind of peak at when we're trying to go to sleep, or if you constantly need to get up and go to pee, and then you find it difficult to go back to sleep. So there's so many different reasons why sleep will be disruptive. And I think in those cases, kind of underlying the root or finding the root cause and supporting sleep. So when you do get sleep, it's good quality sleep. At minimum, we want at minimum 3 to 5 consecutive hours of sleep. So that's kind of the goal. So we do whatever we can to get at least 5 hours of sleep consecutively. And then preparing our body for sleep. So we're really focusing on sleep hygiene. And even before you go to bed, so making sure your room is cool, not too hot. If you need a fan on, or if you open a window, keep it nice and dark. And your room really should just be for sleep and sex. And there should be no TVs, no electronics, or anything like that in your bedroom, so that when you are in your room, your body is already anticipating this kind of relaxation phase. I talked too about, as a mom, for example, you need to have a space in your house that is your safe space. And I typically recommend that you kind of make your bedroom that safe, calm space for you. So, it could be extreme, like you could paint the walls a common color, change your decor, or whatever. But sometimes it's just as meaningful as making your bed in the morning, clearing out any excess clutter. So making sure that when you come into your room, like visually, it's very calming, and you can kind of feel that weight step off, so that when you do sleep, you are getting the most of what's available. And if you're in throes with kids, you just, accept that this is a stage of life. It's not always going to be like this, and you can still set yourself up for success by focusing on good sleep hygiene, so that when this stage ends, these habits of like scrolling your phone late at night or watching TV to fall asleep don't stick with you as you move through the stage. So just wherever you are with in your stage of life, and sleep is so important. So just protect the sleep that you can get and make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success. And as much as we can, kind of aim for 3 to 5 consecutive hours, as often as we can.
Yeah. I'm going to build on that one too, because some clients, when I start working with them, will say like, "Oh, I automatically get up at 1 in the morning or 2 in the morning, and then I can't get back to sleep." And whether it's because I'm getting up because I have to pee, whether it's like I'm wide awake, whether it's a busy brain or whatever. And I'm going to go against what Oprah said back in the 90s and say you can have a snack before bed.
Mhm.
Some women are saying like, if I just cut out the late night eating, then I'll lose the weight. But I'm going to suggest that there's value for some of you in keeping the snack in later at night, particularly if you have an earlier dinner. It's just what we're choosing to eat. And that might help you kind of sleep more throughout the night. And so what you want to do is choose a protein and something of higher fiber carbohydrate because it's slower digesting. And again, you just keep your portions really small because like Christina said, we want to really prioritize rest and digest. So it doesn't have to be something. If you ever notice like you eat candy or junk food before, you're more restless in your sleep, or if you have a really heavy meal, like you eat at a restaurant really late at night and then you go to bed, you have a harder time with sleep after that. You feel really tired at the beginning, but then it's just not as restful of a sleep. So this can also help you with that. Again, if we're having good sleep on a weight loss side, then it's going to help with our cravings. It's going to help with our energy to do things as well. And so it has a correlation, not necessarily a causation, but there's a relationship between that and weight loss. So try the snack and see if that helps you out.
Mhm. Yeah, and one thing I would add to in regards to sleep is that a really common trigger for poor sleep can be a wine before bed too. So if that's a habit that has maybe found its way into your life too, maybe just evaluating like, do you notice if you sleep better and do you feel like less bloated in the morning if you don't have wine the night before? It's very common to see that. I talk a lot about engaging into this parasympathetic tone, this rest and digest phase side of our nervous system before bed. And one thing I like to recommend is just legs up the wall. So you can do that on your bed, and you kind of sit closest to the wall and then swing your legs up and you literally just hang out there with your legs up the wall. Or you can do it like if you're watching TV or reading a book downstairs, it doesn't matter. It just helps with fluid retention for sure. It helps lymphatic flow kind of come back towards the heart so everything can kind of be flushed out so you can release stress from the day essentially. It also helps with hamstring tightness. So if you're waking up with like a chronically sore back, stretching out the hamstrings can be really helpful before bed and help you get a more restful sleep too. But feet up the wall is just such a nice addition, such an easy and free thing to do. If it's available to you, it's definitely beneficial to add that into your nighttime routine.
Yeah, I've been tapping into this one for a long time because like you and I have been working on digestive health for a long time. And yeah, it just sometimes if it's not up a wall, it's just like my feet up at a 90 on top of the couch and then just watch, or I'm petting the dog or I'm doing something from that position. It works super great.
Yeah.
So people are going to wonder about supplements and stuff like that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, there's so many different things that we can do. I think I love kind of partnering with you on your clients going through because you can put such a focus on their dietary and lifestyle. That's like the bulk of treatment for a lot of things, right? If we can nail in diet and lifestyle changes to support your overall health, that's going to be such a powerful impact. So from that perspective, I typically will talk about soluble fiber to help with digestion. So increasing things that like get jelly in water just to help things move through the body a little bit easier. It acts as a demulcent or it soothes the inflammation going down the digestive tract. So that's things like ground flaxseed, chia seeds, overnight oats, things like that. Probiotics for sure. I know there's so many different probiotics and how do you choose which one? So I base off what the patient is presenting, like if it's constipation or if it's diarrhea, it switches the strains that I recommend in probiotics. So there's a whole bunch of different like bacterial strains or fungus strains too that I will choose specifically based off what the patient is presenting with, and then we switch them. So probiotics for me, they help to temporarily influence the gut microbiome. They don't permanently change the gut microbiome, as in like when you withdraw a probiotic or you stop a probiotic, you don't have like consistent change, like you will revert back if we don't change any other dietary and lifestyle changes. So probiotic for me, it's important for sure, but it's not something that I need people to be on forever. And I will often switch products and switch strains based off what's presenting on. So probiotics is there's a whole world of research in terms of probiotics, but they are definitely very helpful. Supplements too, depending on what's going on in menopause, there's different herbs, black cohosh and like red clover, things like that, to really support. In terms of inflammation, the biggest ones that people often think about are turmeric, which is very helpful too for overall systemic inflammation. Ginger can be helpful depending if there's like acid reflux or things like that. There might be different herbs and stuff that we recommend to help soothe any inflammation going down. So things like that are further demulcents that are a little bit stronger than soluble fiber, like slippery elm, things like that. There's so many different ways to kind of treat the body. And I think that's where the benefit comes, is to talking to someone who can help you decipher what's going on. And then instead of just taking like mittfuls of supplements at a time, which can happen because there's a supplement for everything, just be very strategic about what you're supplementing and why you're supplementing, how long you're on it, and what dose to take it is where the benefit comes from.
That's why I love that when clients come into the coaching program, right? They're looking to lose weight. We're doing the lifestyle stuff, but they're partnering with you as well, is because you get to handle all that piece and you get
Yeah.
to change the protocol too. But what I did hear you say about the probiotic is that the probiotic necessarily won't do much if you're not changing your lifestyle outputs. And so if you continue to eat banking just on the probiotic to do the job, to repopulate it and balance your hormones and do all that stuff, it's not going to help. You need to have the combination of two, with lifestyle being the prominent one and then the probiotic coming in to support it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and you did touch on fiber too, so I'll just kind of go into it. Fiber does fall under the carb umbrella, but unlike sugars, fibers can't be broken down into sugar, so it'll pass through the small intestine into the large, where it can get fermented and kind of broken down by the bacteria that lives there. Instead, it improves our digestive system, so it also helps with cholesterol too. And what we do want to be sure we do is to introduce them slowly, and the reason being is because you can introduce them pretty quickly, being like, okay, I'm going to boost my fiber, I'm going to meet my minimum fiber targets or whatever. And then all of a sudden you get a slew of digestive upset, like bloating, or diarrhea or that sort of thing. So you do want to introduce them slowly. So examples could be like your whole grains, your oatmeal, your oat bran, your brown rice, your flaxseed, your beans, your peas, your kidney beans, vegetables like artichokes, Brussels sprouts, squash, asparagus, broccoli, sweet potato, and some fruit too, like blackberries, oranges, grapefruit, prunes, apples, and blueberries. And that'll also help with those crashes and cravings too, if we boost up our fiber too. You're also going to feel more satiated as well. So you're going to have less of a need to do more snacking.
Yeah. Yeah. Fruits are great. I know they get a bad rap, but they're important too to include in your diet.
Yeah.
Um, s- uh, Another way that we can help our digestion is to avoid eating foods that you're sensitive to. And this can be a tricky one. Like if you're sensitive to dairy, but it's summer and you want an ice cream, I always say you eat it and enjoy it and just be prepared for what's to come, or be understanding that, you consume something that your body's not digesting properly right now. And sometimes that can shift too. In menopause, it's not uncommon to hear like a woman say like, oh, like I used to be able to enjoy a steak every once in a while, but now it just causes like a huge diarrhea bouts or something like that. And there's so many factors that come with that. It's most likely from a shift in the microbiome. So, again, that overgrowth of a specific bacteria, excuse me, that is just making it a little bit more difficult to digest foods that you were once able to digest. And that doesn't mean that that's a permanent change. And that's, again, diet and lifestyle and good quality supplements will help to address that.
Yeah. And I'm going to cover the last two. The one is eat carbs. A lot of women will say, like, I just had one saying, like, she's on the sugar detox. I get the sugar, but I don't understand the whole don't eat carbs. So cutting out carbs is just not great for blood sugar control. It can increase your cortisol, decrease your thyroid function. So, but we can, though, choose higher fiber carbs, like we already talked about. And then I always like to try this one rule is don't eat naked carbs. Try and pair a carb with a protein always, or maybe a fat always. That'll help things along there as well. And the other one would be consistent calorie intake. So your body isn't stressed out, going kind of up and down. So if you think about it, I have consistent calorie intake and then the weekends come, or I have consistent and then at the end I don't, or oh, now I have to beat myself up and eat less carbs the next day, or less foods the next day, or less calories the next day. So we want to try and be as consistent with our calorie intake as possible, so that we aren't putting more stress on the body. And that's probably something that people haven't considered. That was 11 points we just went through. And so that's what I meant at the very beginning, where I kind of said, hey, we're going to cover quite a few of them, but I hope that you can at least start with 1 to 2 of them. And then once you've kind of mastered those, I'd say 30 to 90 days, then come back and grab a couple more as well. And of course, always having a naturopath on your team is always helpful. Christina, before we kind of wrap this up, we did have 3 questions here. The first one was, does perimenopause inflammation cause bowel issues? Why, and tips to fix this? So we kind of already covered this, but let's make sure we got it.
Yeah, we can see like a natural slowdown of digestion too with that decline of estrogen. And ways to kind of support your overall digestion is by all those tips that we kind of talked about, just making sure you're getting adequate fiber, maintaining hydration. So many people are walking around dehydrated, and just grab a water bottle with a straw. Sometimes that can help increase compliance. And then really focusing on your stress. And I would suggest, kind of doing a little bit of testing into thyroid function, which we know can shift in menopause, and maybe looking at your overall blood sugar control. And if insulin resistance is starting to show up, it can present as more inflammation and changes in digestion as well from there.
Yeah. Okay. When inflamed and retaining water, does taking creatine help or make your symptoms worse?
Oh, that's often the most common complaint with creatine is that it will increase water bloating and make you feel like pretty bloated and like your pants really tight. Typically, with consistent supplementation, your body will adjust to it and it will be less noticeable, and then it won't be an issue for you eventually. So creatine so oftentimes if I'm dosing it, like I use it therapeutically for like concussions or something like that, I'll do like a big loading dose, and I'll just say like you're not going to feel great, you're going to feel bloated, and then we taper it down to a lower dose for maintenance. If you're using it for like workouts and things like that, I think even just like maybe starting at a lower dose and then slowly tapering up to where your coach or whatever says you should be could be helpful. So the bloat that comes with creatine supplementation, it's not a forever thing typically, but it is a very common thing, especially in that first like 2 3 weeks of creatine supplementation.
Yeah, and from my standpoint too, when people are taking creatine, they'll only take it on the days they work out. So if they miss, 2 or 3 days, or they're
Yeah.
off for a week, they're not taking it, and then you kind of start back up to the beginning. And so the key with this one, the water retention that's happening with creatine is not the same as water retention that's happening through menopause, although they can be compacted on top of each other. And two, if we're not taking it consistently, then we're going to see those, we're always going to go into those ebbs and flows of the supplements. And there was just one more question. Is there a supplement deficiency in perimenopause or menopause that women should watch out for?
Yeah, there's a few nutrients that I routinely test for. Vitamin D is a big one. We know that there's like an increased risk of bone loss in menopause or osteopenia, osteoporosis. Vitamin D is so critical for that. And also calcium. Calcium is so important. And a lot of people these days I find are like totally avoiding all sources of dairy. So that's been, looking into supplementation makes a lot of sense. But again, it depends on what's going on in your overall cardiovascular health and things like that. So I'd say in terms of like nutrients, For menopause specifically, I look for vitamin D, um, calcium, and then even though you're not cycling, I still do like an iron check, just to make sure because a lot of women are chronically anemic or have low iron. So if that's the case, or some women too have just been like anemic their whole life, they go through menopause and then they still continue their iron, and that can be harmful. If you don't need iron in menopause, so that's when I always check for too. So those I would say are my big one. Definitely calcium, definitely vitamin D, and then, evaluating the iron.
Yeah. Well, we definitely covered a lot today, and I do want to thank you for joining us today because I think that this is often a missed part of a lot of people's approaches to fat loss or weight loss. And again, just to reiterate that when you're in this stage of life, you do need a different game plan, and that's why the old things don't seem to stick around or work. For the women watching this, I want you to consider these trainings like a glass of water. It holds value when consumed, not when left untouched. So you actually have to do something with the glass of water in order to get the hydration benefits. And if you're only drinking it once, then you're not going to get the maximum results. You have to consistently be drinking that water. So the key is to take really imperfect, consistent action. So ask yourself some of these questions, really do the reflective work. And remember, it's not about more, it's about doing simple better. And again, if you find yourself needing support outside of this community and these trainings, you can reach out. I coach women 40 plus to stop constantly dieting, know how to make empowered choices, be flexible versus all or nothing and perfect, and to really just get your freedom back and optimize your hormones and your gut health. And like we've already talked about, Christina is part of my care team or my client's care team as well. And then you can have a 2-for-1, I guess.
Yeah, best of both worlds. Yeah.
Yeah, anything to kind of leave off our audience with?
Yeah, I think that's great. And I love that you offer these trainings. I think this is such valuable information. And I hope you, the viewers who are watching, that you feel empowered, that you have so much control over how you feel. And getting the right support can make a big difference too. So thank you for having me, Cindy.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And thanks everybody for joining.